The most powerful people you know rarely speak about their own power. They don't need to. When they enter a room, something shifts. The tone of conversation, the posture of those present, the energy in the space. You feel their presence before you even consciously notice them. This isn't a mystical gift. It's a precise science of body language, emotional control, and territorial manipulation that anyone can master. True power never needs to announce itself. While the weak talk incessantly about their qualities, the strong let their presence communicate for them. In this video, you'll discover the exact techniques that command absolute respect without uttering a single word. The same techniques that historic and contemporary power figures use to intimidate rivals, inspire followers, and dominate any social environment. Human nature operates counterintuitively here. When you over-explain, when you constantly justify yourself, you're subconsciously signaling weakness. The human brain associates excessive explanations with insecurity and lack of natural authority. True power holders don't feel the need to explain their positions. Their physical presence communicates everything. Historically, feared leaders mastered this principle intuitively. Caesar rarely raised his voice. His mere silent presence caused more apprehension than any verbal threat. The same pattern repeats in nature. The dominant predator doesn't announce its arrival. Its silence is precisely what generates tension. The first rule of silent respect is understanding that words create commitments, and commitments create vulnerabilities. Every statement you make is an implicit promise, an exposure of intentions that can be used against you. Silence, on the other hand, keeps everyone in a permanent state of calculated uncertainty. Observe any social or professional environment. Who talks constantly, interrupting others to be heard? The insecure. Those who need to prove their worth. Who remains quiet, observing, speaking only when necessary and with surgical precision. Those whose authority is unquestionable. This distinction isn't accidental. It's a behavioral pattern that transcends cultures and eras. Respect doesn't result from what you say, but from what you don't need to say. People don't respect those who try to impress them with words. They respect those who demonstrate, through behavior, that they don't need others' validation. There's a practical demonstration of this principle in social psychology experiments. When people are placed in discussion groups, who is perceived as the natural leader? Rarely the most talkative. Almost always the one who speaks less but with greater impact. Economy of words signals that each vocalization has weight, has consequence. The fatal mistake most make when trying to gain respect is believing words substitute substance. They confuse eloquence with authority, when in reality they're often inversely proportional. In corporate environments, for example, the executive who needs to constantly reaffirm his position has already lost it in practice. To master silent respect, start by eliminating behaviors that signal insecurity. Excessive explanations, constant self-promotion, need to fill silences. Replace them with non-verbal dominance, upright posture, deliberate movements, sustained eye contact. Don't rush to respond to accusations or questions. Haste will signal guilt or anxiety. The power of the strategic pause is invariably underestimated. When confronted, the natural instinct is to respond immediately. Resist. 3 seconds of silence before responding creates unbearable tension, transferring pressure to your interlocutor. This simple technique completely inverts the power dynamic in a conversation. The most respected leaders follow an invisible law, the rule of 3 silences, a silent technique that true masters of presence use instinctively. 1. Silence before entering. When you enter a room without speaking, just observing your presence already begins to form. The room feels you. 2. Silence before speaking. The pause before the first word creates authority. Those who rush to speak submit themselves. Those who wait command. 3. Silence before reacting. Provocations are tests. Those who react impulsively lose respect. Those who remain motionless in calculated silence reverse the game. They remain silent before entering, before speaking, and before reacting. This triad creates tension, commands respect, and establishes dominance effortlessly. These 3 silences function as invisible markers of power. The absence of words becomes more powerful than any rehearsed speech. Michael Corleone is the portrait of the rule of 3 silences in Flesh and Blood. In The Godfather, he rarely raises his voice, speaks little, observes everything. When he enters the scene, the room changes, and no one dares interrupt his silence. What makes him so respected aren't his words, but their absence. Notice, Michael enters in silence, listens in silence, decides in silence, and when he finally speaks, the world listens. He dominates because each gesture is calculated, each look is a sentence, and each second of silence is a psychological blow. While others drown trying to explain, justify, prove something, Michael simply exists with absolute authority. His silence is more threatening than any scream. Remember, respect isn't granted to those who request it, but to those who demonstrate not needing it. Excessive need for verbal validation is instinctively perceived as weakness by the human brain. It's an evolutionary remnant. We follow those who demonstrate security through actions, not promises. The apparent contradiction is that the less you speak about yourself, the more others will speak positively about you. When you allow your reputation to be built by third parties, it gains credibility impossible to achieve through self-promotion. The true test of this principle occurs in moments of crisis. Observe how truly powerful people respond to accusations. They don't defend themselves frantically. They remain calm, often silent, letting their previous actions speak for themselves. This response is so counterintuitive, it seems almost supernatural to observers. But did you know there's a specific technique used by historic leaders to intimidate enemies without uttering a single threat? A method so powerful, it changed the course of crucial negotiations before words were even exchanged. That technique I mentioned, it's the deliberate manipulation of body language to project absolute authority. This is the domain where true respect is forged, not in your words, but in how you occupy space. Nonverbal communication constitutes over 90% of the impression we make. Your body constantly emits signals of dominance or submission, regardless of your conscious intentions. The inconvenient reality is that people around you read these signals instinctively, evaluating your position in the social hierarchy before you even speak. Look at posture, the most immediately visible element. A slightly arched spine, dropped shoulders, or neck projected forward are universally interpreted as submission signals. These micro-signals activate primitive responses in observers' brains, categorizing you as non-dominant before any verbal interaction. The body doesn't lie, even when your words project confidence. Incongruencies in body language reveal the truth. Powerful executives know their physical presence communicates authority long before any speech. They cultivate a posture that occupies space decisively, without apologies. Feet firmly planted, expansive stance, deliberate movements. Eye contact is particularly revealing. Looking away prematurely during interactions signals automatic submission. It's a primitive response similar to animals establishing hierarchies. The sustained gaze without aggression, but with unwavering firmness, is interpreted as a sign of social dominance in all human cultures. This isn't a game of staring uncomfortably. It's about maintaining eye contact for fractions of a second beyond what would be socially comfortable. This small extension creates an imperceptible tension that establishes dominance without need for direct confrontation. The speed of physical movements also transmits volumes about your perceived status. Hurried movements, nervous touches to face or hair, foot tapping, all signal anxiety and lack of control. Compare with the economy of movement of the truly powerful, precise gestures, deliberately slow cadence, absence of superfluous movements. Observe Vladimir Putin at international conferences. His movements are almost predatorily slow, creating an aura of absolute control. This isn't about politics, but deliberate technique. The calculated slowness of movements communicates that he doesn't need to hurry for anyone. Proxemics, use of physical space, communicates social hierarchy instantly. Insecure people minimize their space, keeping arms close to body, crossing doorways quickly, automatically yielding passage. In contrast, deliberate space occupation, legs slightly apart when standing, arms resting comfortably on chair armrests, projects territorial control. Even your breathing communicates your power level. Shallow, rapid breathing is associated with anxiety and fear. Deep, slow abdominal breathing is linked to confidence and control. Before entering high-pressure situations, 3 deep breaths reset your physiology and consequently, how you're perceived. These principles aren't mere theories, they're applied biology. Neuroimaging studies show that when we adopt expansive postures, Our testosterone levels increase, while cortisol, stress hormone, decreases. The fascinating paradox is that faking confidence through posture literally creates biochemical confidence. Facial microexpressions are equally critical. Excessive unreciprocated smiling, common in people seeking approval, instantly diminishes perceived status. A neutral countenance, slightly austere, punctuated by rare but genuine smiles, maximizes perception of authority. Vocal control even in silence matters. When you eventually speak, the grave tone paused with moderate but persistent volume amplifies respect. Avoid rising inflections at phrase endings, which sound like questions, and eliminate defensive qualifiers. I just think, maybe, kind of. These elements form an integrated system of authoritative communication that transcends words. When mastered, they allow you to enter any environment and be instinctively respected before opening your mouth. Practical application begins with honest self-assessment. Film yourself in social interactions. You'll be alarmed by how many submission signals you unconsciously emit. Correcting these patterns requires deliberate practice until new bodily habits become automatic. However, a delicate balance must be maintained. Silent authority doesn't mean aggression. The line between perceived dominance and apparent hostility is subtle. The goal is to project quiet strength, not explicit intimidation that generates resistance. Certainly you've experienced this. You entered a room and immediately felt someone's presence before even seeing them. This almost magnetic sensation isn't mystical. It's the result of a constellation of perfectly aligned non-verbal signals. This knowledge carries significant responsibility. Conscious manipulation of non-verbal signals is a powerful form of influence precisely because it operates below others' consciousness radar. Used ethically, it establishes natural leadership. Abused, it becomes predatory manipulation. However, there's a devastating mistake that makes apparently powerful people lose all respect in seconds. A slip so common that even experienced leaders frequently commit it, instantly destroying the aura of authority they've cultivated for years. That devastating mistake, emotional reactivity. The moment you allow external provocations to dictate your emotional responses, all your silent authority crumbles. True power doesn't react, it responds deliberately in its own chosen time. Emotional control is the invisible foundation upon which all lasting respect is built. When someone maintains unshakable composure, while everyone around succumbs to emotional chaos, that person is automatically perceived as superior. This dynamic is so fundamental in human behavior, it transcends cultures and contexts. Machiavelli astutely observed that the ideal prince demonstrates infallible self-control, not for morality, but for pure strategy. Emotional explosion, even when justified, reveals vulnerability exploited by perceptive rivals. Each impulsive reaction is, essentially, a confession that something external controls your internal state. Consider timing in social interactions. Urgency to respond immediately to provocations or accusations signals deep insecurity. Those who respond instantly reveal fear of not being heard if they wait. The truly powerful exploit the discomfort of silence, responding only when they decide it's advantageous. This strategic pause isn't just psychological, it's neurological. By inserting an interval between stimulus and response, you deactivate the amygdala impulsive circuit and activate the prefrontal cortex, where calculated decisions replace instinctive reactions. This neurological transfer is visually perceptible to others, who instinctively recognize superior self-mastery. The specific technique employed by the most powerful negotiators is the power pause, 3 to 5 seconds of absolute silence after a provocation, maintaining neutral facial expression and constant eye contact. This brief interval creates unbearable tension for the provocateur, often leading them to retract or weaken their position before your response even comes. A particularly effective variation is responding to verbal provocations only with subtle facial expressions, a slight eyebrow raise, an almost imperceptible side smile. This contrast between verbal aggression and minimalist nonverbal response creates devastating dissonance, transferring discomfort to the aggressor. In corporate meetings, observe who constantly interrupts and who silently absorbs information before speaking. The interrupters reveal insecurity about the value of their contributions. The silent observers are invariably considered more hierarchically senior, even when they're not. Warren Buffett deliberately employs this technique. In critical negotiations, he often remains silent after the other party presents their offer, creating a vacuum the opponent feels compelled to fill with additional concessions. Prolonged silence is almost physically painful for insecure negotiators. Culturally, this principle manifests in distinct but universally recognizable forms. In Japanese culture, space interval between actions is considered as important as the actions themselves. This concept applies perfectly to Western social interactions, where control of communicative rhythm establishes dominance. The extreme application of this principle is the absolute silence technique in direct confrontations. When accused or aggressively questioned, complete non-response, simply maintaining eye contact without any verbal acknowledgement, creates psychological discomfort so intense it often forces the aggressor to retreat completely. Emotional mastery also expresses itself through behavioral consistency. Dramatic mood fluctuations signal lack of internal control, while emotional predictability, independent of external circumstances, communicates unshakable strength. People are naturally attracted to this stability, perceiving it as a sign of reliable leadership. You'll notice this clearly in figures of genuine authority. Their behavior rarely varies significantly, whether in moments of triumph or crisis. This consistency is subconsciously interpreted as evidence of an internal center of gravity, independent of external circumstances. The practice of non-reaction requires significant self-knowledge. Identify your specific emotional triggers, those themes or provocations that historically generated impulsive reactions. These are exactly the points where intelligent adversaries will attack, seeking to break your composure. A particularly effective technique is anticipatory mental rehearsal, deliberately visualizing provocative scenarios and pre-programming controlled responses. This preventive conditioning neutralizes the surprise element that often triggers emotional reactivity. The paradox of self-containment is that the more you practice it externally, the more it becomes your internal reality. Initially, it may feel like a performance. Eventually, it becomes your authentic nature. Brain neurochemistry literally reconfigures itself in response to consistent behavioral patterns. Another critical element is conscious management of physical energy. Unstable emotional states often result from energy fluctuations, hunger, fatigue, dehydration. The truly powerful meticulously manage their physiology, ensuring their biological instrument sustains their psychological performance. The ultimate goal isn't to suppress emotions, but to consciously choose when, how, and if to express them. Unchosen emotions are vulnerabilities. Deliberately employed emotions are strategic tools. The subtle difference between reaction and response completely defines how you're perceived. Have you noticed how billionaire CEOs often employ a specific technique that makes others feel subconsciously judged without saying absolutely anything? A silent method that transfers the entire weight of interaction to the other person. That technique used by billionaires, its silent evaluative presence, a combination of sustained gaze, neutral facial expression, and prolonged silence that compels others to involuntarily justify themselves. But this is just one facet of the non-verbal arsenal that creates automatic respect. Silent demonstration of value represents the next level of sophistication in the art of respect without words. While most seek constant verbal validation, the truly powerful demonstrate value through carefully calibrated actions that eliminate any need for self-promotion. There's a fundamental contradiction few understand. Talking about your own achievements invariably diminishes their impact. The moment you verbalize, "I built a successful company," or "I have decades of experience," the perceived value of those accomplishments instantly depreciates. It's a devastating psychological paradox for those who don't understand it. Masters of silent influence apply the oblique demonstration rule, never directly stating their qualifications, but creating situations where they become evident through behaviors or tangible results. This technique is exponentially more powerful than any direct statement. Consider how historically effective leaders rarely elaborated on their achievements. Julius Caesar didn't need to announce his military genius. His victories spoke for him. In modern contexts, observe how truly respected executives rarely recite their resumes, while the insecure constantly remind others of their titles and accomplishments. Strategic outsourcing of praise represents another critical component. When others proclaim your value, the validation carries credibility impossible to achieve through self-promotion. The specific technique involves creating conditions where third parties observe your competence and naturally become evangelists of your capability. This approach requires significant patience, a trait consistently observed in high-status individuals. While common people seek immediate validation, the truly influential allow their reputation to develop organically through consistent demonstrations of competence, not declarations about it. Behavioral consistency surpasses any verbal promise. When your actions follow a predictable pattern of excellence, each performance silently reinforces your reputation. This compound effect explains why figures of genuine authority often seem to exercise almost magnetic influence. Years of consistent behavior create an aura of reliability that words could never replicate. Even how you receive compliments communicates your perceived status. The overly enthusiastic or grateful response to a compliment signals rarity of recognition, an implicit admission of low status. Simple, contained thanks without elaboration communicates that recognition was expected and deserved. The paradox of silent competence is particularly evident in professional environments. Those who constantly announce future projects impress momentarily, but inevitably diminish their credibility. Those who consistently deliver results without grandiose announcements accumulate lasting respect. This principle manifests clearly in social dynamics. Observe how truly secure people rarely dominate conversations. They prefer to listen attentively, speak concisely, and allow others to fill conversational spaces. This economy of words creates a perception that each statement carries significant weight. The specific technique of selective silence involves remaining quiet precisely when others expect you to speak, especially to defend yourself or self-justify. This verbal vacuum creates a powerful impression of unshakable self-confidence that no verbal defense could equal. Steve Jobs mastered this approach. He rarely responded directly to criticism, preferring to let Apple products speak for themselves. This deliberate refusal to engage defensively created an impression of superiority that transcended any possible verbal argument. Strategic timing represents another crucial element. Knowing exactly when to demonstrate value and when to deliberately conceal it differentiates the naturally respected from the desperately validated. Demonstrating capability precisely when necessary, not constantly, maximizes its impact. In social situations, common people often display status signals, material possessions, important connections, immediately. The truly powerful often initially understate, allowing others to underestimate their influence, a strategically advantageous position in almost any interaction. This deliberate understatement represents a vital counterintuitive. True power rarely needs to be announced. In fact, constant status ostentation usually signals deep insecurity about that status's legitimacy. Those genuinely comfortable with their position rarely feel the need to announce it. The specific technique of revealed value involves allowing your attributes or achievements to be gradually discovered by others, not presented immediately. This sequential revelation creates a much more impactful narrative than any frontal presentation of credentials. However, there's a devastating trap that even extraordinarily talented people often fall into, an almost universal mistake that makes them instantly lose all hard-won respect, regardless of their objective achievements. That devastating trap? The need for approval. The moment you seek external validation, you reveal a dependency that instantly erodes any respect. Powerful people don't need confirmation. They define realities that others naturally accept. Manipulation of physical space represents perhaps the most underestimated aspect of silent respect. The territory you occupy, how you occupy it, and how you allow others to interact with that space communicates social hierarchy more directly than any word. Our evolutionary psychology interprets territorial control as a primary status indicator. Whoever controls the physical environment controls the interaction. This dynamic operates constantly, usually below the level of consciousness, creating indelible impressions about who commands respect and who grants it. Start by observing how you enter environments. Low-status people enter hesitantly, seeking approval, adjusting their presence to accommodate others. Authority figures enter decisively, with controlled rhythm, assuming the space will naturally accommodate their presence, not the other way around. The specific technique of deliberate space-taking involves entering environments with slightly reduced speed, maximized posture, and eye contact directed at the most influential occupants of the space. This combination unconsciously signals that you belong and expect automatic recognition. Strategic positioning in meetings and social gatherings provides decisive advantage. The traditional power position, sitting at the head of the table or facing the entrance, isn't coincidence, but deliberate exploitation of spatial dynamics that communicate authority. Those who understand these principles automatically occupy dominant positions without seeming forced. Observe territorial behaviors in social environments. Insecure individuals minimize their spatial impact, sit compactly, move to accommodate others, allow constant interruptions of their personal space. Respected figures naturally establish and maintain territorial boundaries that others instinctively respect. The perimeter establishment technique involves subtly defining your personal space through object positioning, a strategically placed phone, precisely aligned documents, or body posture that establishes invisible yet psychologically real boundaries. This perimeter, once established, is rarely violated. Territorial psychology manifests strongly in leadership contexts. Respected executives often remain standing when subordinates sit, creating vertical disparity that reinforces hierarchy. Deliberately remaining in your own office when others are summoned, instead of moving to others' spaces, similarly establishes favorable territorial dynamic. Movement control within shared spaces communicates unquestionable authority. Powerful people move deliberately through the environment, often touching objects or furniture in passing, a subconscious territorial behavior that establishes dominion over space. This proprietary touch signals control without confrontation. Even small positional adjustments communicate volumes about perceived hierarchy. When someone approaches, whoever moves to accommodate automatically assumes subordinate position. The positional fixedness technique, remaining firmly in place while others adjust around you, creates a powerful impression of central authority. In negotiation scenarios, environmental control offers substantial advantage. The ability to determine temperature, lighting, seating arrangement, or schedules confers psychological control before substantive negotiation even begins. This advantage often determines outcomes more decisively than subsequent verbal arguments. Strategic entry and exit techniques amplify perceptions of authority. The calculated delayed entry, arriving precisely a few minutes after expected time, paradoxically increases perceived status by communicating that your time carries premium value. This tactic, when employed moderately, establishes a dynamic where others wait for you, not the other way around. Similarly, the controlled early exit, leaving social or professional environments while still energetically engaged, not when exhausted, creates an impression of self-control and deliberate prioritization. Common people stay until exhaustion, powerful figures leave at the peak, maintaining control over perceptions. Manipulation of proxemics. Interpersonal distances communicates status instantly. Invading personal space signals aggressive dominance. Excessive distance suggests subservient evasion. Calibrated proxemics. Maintaining slightly greater distance than culturally expected while fully engaged establishes respect without intimidation. Control of vertical space similarly affects perceptions. Remaining standing when others sit, choosing higher seats or positioning yourself on natural platforms creates height disparity that the human brain instinctively associates with favorable social hierarchy. Even movement flow in social spaces establishes power perceptions. Common people move constantly to adapt to others' needs. Powerful figures remain relatively stationary while others circulate around them, a configuration that naturally establishes social gravitational center. Spatial occupation extends beyond the physical to include sonic occupation of environment. Controlled but consistently audible vocal volume, without need for repetition, establishes acoustic dominance naturally. This contrasts with the common pattern of speaking loudly when insecure, or inaudibly when intimidated, distinguishing respected communicators. How your body responds to territorial invasions reveals volumes about your perceived status. The nonverbal territorial defense technique, maintaining position while others retreat, sustaining eye contact when challenged, demonstrates territorial dominance without aggressive escalation that would seem insecure. In corporate environments, object manipulation also establishes psychological territoriality. Deliberate placement of personal objects in shared spaces, subtle environment reorganization, even the act of sitting at the table before others arrive, all communicate psychological ownership that's rarely contested. Congruence between environmental control and body language is particularly potent. When you simultaneously occupy space decisively and project non-defensive bodily openness, you establish an impression of secure authority that doesn't need ostensive protection. This combination rarely occurs naturally, making it immediately noticeable when deliberately employed. Even small territorial behaviors communicate status. The minimal displacement technique, remaining fundamentally in position when others need to pass, forcing them to completely circumvent you instead of both adjusting, establishes subtle but profoundly impactful territorial dominance. Non-verbal communication experts often employ the spatial anchoring technique, identifying and consistently occupying focal points in any environment. When executed naturally, this approach leads others to gravitate toward you, creating social formation where you occupy natural center without apparent effort. The secret political leaders often use to intimidate rivals without verbal confrontation. Deliberate combination of environmental control, strategic positioning, and controlled rhythm, creating a dynamic where opponents feel psychologically in foreign territory before any substantive discussion even begins. The spatial intimidation technique is powerful, but represents only one facet of the Machiavellian strategy to command silent respect. Equally crucial is the art of personal scarcity, deliberate manipulation of your own accessibility to increase your perceived value. The fundamental principle here derives directly from basic economics. Any abundant and easily available resource depreciates in value. When you become constantly accessible, emotionally, physically, socially, you inadvertently diminish your perceived value. This is an inescapable psychological truth that transcends contexts. Observe universally respected figures. They're rarely available to anyone, at any time. Their presence carries weight precisely because it's limited. This calculated inaccessibility isn't coincidence, but deliberate strategy. Scarcity, when applied to your own person, creates automatic appreciation. The selective availability technique involves establishing clear patterns about when, how, and for whom you're accessible. In professional contexts, this manifests as time blocks dedicated to specific tasks, planned unavailability, and rigorous screening of interruption. This deliberate structuring of accessibility communicates that your time has premium value. In social dynamics, the same technique applies through qualitative presence, being completely present when engaged, but rigorously selective about when that engagement occurs. This contrast is particularly effective when compared to the common pattern of constant but superficial availability. Informational scarcity represents another powerful application of this principle. Insecure people often voluntarily offer excessive information, personal details, opinions, future plans. This self-promotional transparency paradoxically diminishes interest and respect. Calibrated and strategic information revelation, on the other hand, maintains curiosity and engagement. Observe how historic figures of immense power often cultivated an aura of mystery, not for vanity, but for strategic utility. Human psychology naturally fills informational gaps, often in ways that amplify perceptions of capability and influence when properly contextualized. The specific technique of informational minimalism involves providing exactly enough information to satisfy immediate requirements, never exceeding communicative necessity. This informational economy creates a perception of reserved depth that others automatically respect, presuming substantial intellectual resources beyond what's revealed. In negotiations, strategic inaccessibility confers disproportionate advantage. The calculated withdrawal technique, becoming temporarily unavailable at crucial points in the process, creates psychological pressure that often leads opponents to make concessions to restore access. This dynamic explains why experienced negotiators often need to consult superiors, creating artificial scarcity that amplifies influence. The fascinating paradox is that the less you satisfy social expectations of constant availability, the more your eventual presence is valued. This contradiction manifests clearly in leadership contexts, where leaders who maintain appropriate psychological distance invariably command more respect than those constantly accessible. Sophisticated application of this principle requires delicate balance between accessibility and distance. Complete inaccessibility generates resentment. Constant availability generates devaluation. The ideal point lies in intermittent high-impact presence, limited but significant availability that maintains appreciation without alienation. Practical implementation begins with honest audit of your current availability patterns. Do you respond immediately to all messages? Are you constantly available for meetings? Do you share information excessively? Do you allow frequent interruptions? If yes, you're inadvertently signaling low value through personal superabundance. Correction involves deliberate boundary establishment, predetermined periods of unavailability, clear contact protocols, strategic response deferment, and controlled information release. Initially uncomfortable, these practices quickly re-establish value perceptions that command automatic respect. In corporate environments, implementation may include designated office hours instead of constant availability, regular periods of uninterrupted focus, and rigorous appointment screening. In social contexts, it manifests as deliberate selectivity about which invitations to accept and how much time to invest in specific interactions. The most subtle psychological aspect of this technique involves intermittent psychological presence, alternating between complete engagement and calculated detachment even within continuous interactions. This variation in presential intensity keeps others psychologically engaged through intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful pattern for sustaining behavior. Culturally, we perceive this dynamic clearly. Cultures that value constant emotional expression often demonstrate lower hierarchical reverence than those emphasizing emotional composure and limited revelation. This cross-cultural observation reinforces the universality of the scarcity principle applied to personal expression. The most counterintuitive element of this principle is that creating appropriate psychological distance often intensifies connection, doesn't diminish it. The paradoxical proximity technique explores this contradiction through deliberate cycles of intense connection, followed by calculated withdrawal, creating a dynamic that intensifies desire for reconnection. There's a specific technique that transforms even social rejection into power magnetism, an approach that fundamentally contradicts the natural instinct to seek constant acceptance and approval. A strategy so counterintuitive that when correctly implemented, it transforms ostracism into the foundation of extraordinary influence. What you've learned so far is just the surface of silent power. In the next video, I reveal the forbidden technique that true masters of manipulation use to control people without them noticing. Click now on the screen video before this information disappears.